Michael Carter was sitting in his luxurious office at the top of the building that housed the headquarters of his hotel chain. The panoramic view of New York City stretched before him, a constant reminder of everything he had achieved. Each building, each road was a symbol of his hard work and determination, but despite all his success and wealth, Michael felt that there was something he still could not fully control. The future of his son, Jason. Jason meant everything to Michael. From a young age, he had been raised with all the privileges that money could buy. He attended the best schools, frequented the most exclusive social circles, and never knew what it was like to fight for every penny, as Michael had done throughout his life. And perhaps that was the problem. Michael knew that to protect what he had built, he needed to ensure that Jason was surrounded by trustworthy people, those who would not take advantage of his naivety or the family's money. So when Jason showed up with a new girlfriend, Samantha, Michael became immediately alert. It wasn't that he didn't trust his son's judgment, but life had taught him that not everyone had good intentions, and he wasn't willing to take risks. Samantha seemed charming. She was beautiful, educated, and apparently independent. But Michael knew that appearances could be deceiving, and there was nothing more dangerous than underestimating someone. He needed to find a way to discover if Samantha was with Jason for who he was or for what he represented. That's when an idea began to form in his mind, something that, at first glance, might seem crazy, but Michael believed was the only way to truly know the truth. What if he disguised himself? What if he assumed a completely different identity, someone Samantha would never associate with the powerful businessman Michael Carter? The idea was audacious, and that only made it more appealing to him. Michael decided that he would disguise himself as a rideshare driver. He would use this role to get close to Samantha without her knowing who he really was. That way, he could observe her up close, interact with her in everyday situations, and perhaps discover something that confirmed or refuted his suspicions. It was a plan that required subtlety and intelligence, qualities he had in abundance. With the plan decided, Michael prepared for the transformation. He bought a modest car, a simple sedan, and changed his appearance. He grew a scruffy beard, put on reading glasses, and swapped his expensive clothes for simple shirts and jeans. He chose a fictitious name, Rick. Rick would be a middle-aged man, friendly, who always had a kind word for his passengers. He was ready for the role. The perfect moment to initiate the plan came when Jason casually mentioned that Samantha had an important meeting in Los Angeles. He suggested that she take a rideshare to the airport, and Michael saw the perfect opportunity to insert himself into the situation. That day, as he prepared to meet Samantha, Michael felt a pang of nervousness he hadn't felt in years. It was almost as if he were about to close a major business deal, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his early days as an entrepreneur. The difference now was that success would not mean profit, but rather the safety of his son. Michael waited outside the building where Samantha worked, disguised as a rideshare driver. As soon as she got into the car, he introduced himself with a friendly smile. "Good morning, Miss Samantha. I'm Rick, and I'll be taking you to the airport today." She smiled back, polite, and thanked him for his kindness. During the drive, Michael tried to start a casual conversation, mentioning the traffic and the weather, topics that seemed innocent enough. But to his surprise, Samantha was not just courteous. She seemed genuinely interested in chatting. She asked about his life as a rideshare driver, and Michael found himself inventing stories about the different passengers he had met. It was an act, of course, but he was surprised at how attentive she was, listening to every word as if he were the only person that mattered at that moment. This unsettled him. When they arrived at the airport, Samantha exited the car and thanked Michael again for the ride. He watched her as she disappeared into the terminal, trying to understand why that simple interaction had left him so intrigued. He hadn't found anything wrong, no obvious signs of financial interest, but he knew it was only the beginning, and he would need much more than one ride to draw his conclusions. He was determined to continue, to maintain his disguise and uncover the truth, even if it meant spending weeks observing Samantha's every move. In the following days, Michael maintained his disguise as Rick and patiently waited for the next opportunity to interact with Samantha. He knew he couldn't be obvious or too insistent, otherwise he would raise suspicions. So he continued accepting various rides, studying the behaviors and reactions of his passengers, like an actor rehearsing for his big role. But his true objective was clear. He wanted to observe Samantha in different situations, to see if the image she projected when she was with Jason matched the one she maintained in her everyday life. The chance he was waiting for finally came one afternoon when Jason called him, mentioning that Samantha needed a driver to take her to a charity event in a nearby city. Michael immediately offered his services, of course without revealing his identity, and was assigned to the ride. He made sure to arrive a little earlier than scheduled and waited, observing his surroundings attentively. When Samantha entered the car, she seemed more relaxed and even excited about the trip. "Good afternoon, Ms. Samantha. How are you? Ready for the event?" he asked, smiling gently as he adjusted the rearview mirror. "Hi, Rick. I'm great, thanks. I'm actually excited. This event is special to me," she replied, her eyes sparkling. Michael became curious, but kept the facade of a casual driver. The journey would be long, giving him plenty of time to get to know her better. As the trip progressed, Michael asked what exactly the event involved. Samantha explained that it was a charity auction to raise funds for an organization that helped children from underprivileged communities. She was involved as a volunteer and had helped organize the event. Michael found himself admiring the enthusiasm and passion with which she spoke about her work, something he hadn't expected to find. It was clear that she genuinely cared, and he noticed that her tone was sincere, without any hint of self-promotion. "And I got involved with this cause a few years ago," she said, looking out the window, lost in thought. "I grew up watching my mum struggle to take care of me alone, and I know how hard it is for many families. I want to help in any way I can, no matter how small." Michael remained silent for a moment, absorbing those words. He found himself reflecting on his own life, his childhood of hardships, and how hard he had worked to change his destiny. Was Samantha telling a story to appear more sympathetic and humble, or was she sincere? He needed to keep going. The ride went smoothly, and as they approached the event, Samantha became more talkative, sharing stories about the children she had met and the impact her volunteer work had on their lives. Michael listened attentively, asking sporadic questions, trying to detect any flaws or inconsistencies. But to his astonishment, the more she spoke, the harder it was to find anything that indicated ulterior motives. They arrived at the event location, and as Samantha exited the car, she thanked Michael for the company and asked him to wait to take her back later. "You don't have to stick around if you have other rides, but if you could come back in a few hours, I'd love for you to take me home," she said, smiling. Michael nodded and pulled away, but didn't leave. He parked in a discreet spot and decided to sneak a peek at what was happening inside the event. His original plan was just to observe her during the ride, but curiosity got the better of him. He blended in with the other guests and found a place at the back of the hall, where he could see Samantha interacting with various people. She seemed at ease, knowing many of the guests by name, and Michael noticed that, contrary to what he had imagined, she wasn't trying to impress anyone with grand gestures or rehearsed conversations. During the auction, he watched her animatedly talking with an older woman, helping her understand the items being bid on, and even playing with some children who were nearby. It was almost impossible for him to believe that someone like her could be with Jason out of mere greed. but he knew it was still too early to draw definitive conclusions. After a few hours, Samantha reappeared in the parking lot and spotted Michael, who had returned to the agreed meeting point. She got into the car with a tired but happy smile. "It was a success," she said. "We raised much more than we expected." "I'm glad to hear that," Michael replied, starting the car. "It's great to see when things work out, especially for a good cause." He observed Samantha through the mirror, waiting for any reaction that might betray her true intentions, but all he saw was gratitude. During the ride back, the atmosphere became more relaxed, and Michael made sure to keep the conversation light. At one point, Samantha mentioned that she regularly visited an orphanage to read stories to the children. "I think it's important to give a little attention and care to those who need it most," she explained, almost as if she were talking to herself. Michael was once again left speechless. He had spent much of his life believing that most people only acted out of self-interest, especially in environments like the one Samantha found herself in. But there she was, saying things that made his belief seem foolish. When they finally arrived back at her apartment, Samantha did something unexpected. She took a $50 bill out of her wallet and handed it to Michael, insisting that he accept it as a thank you for being available to take her there and back. "I know you probably had to give up other rides to help me today, and I really appreciate it," she said with a genuine smile. Michael tried to refuse, but she was adamant. "Please, accept it. I'd feel better this way." And it was then that he realized something important. Samantha was not only polite and kind, she was thoughtful, even about the small things. This touched Michael in a way he hadn't anticipated. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was wrong to judge her so quickly, but the plan was still not over, and he knew he needed to continue. There were more questions he wanted answered before he could finally reveal the truth to Jason. Michael continued his disguise in the following days, now more intrigued than suspicious. He realized that his interactions with Samantha were becoming increasingly difficult to decipher. She seemed genuinely good, but years of experience had taught him to be cautious. He knew appearances could be deceiving, and his goal was not just to protect Jason, but also to ensure he was surrounded by people who truly cared about him. The next ride came unexpectedly. It was a normal weekday, and Michael had just dropped off a passenger in a quiet neighborhood when he received a new request. To his surprise, it was Samantha again. She needed a driver to take her to an orphanage in a more remote area of the city. Michael accepted the ride immediately, knowing this would give him another chance to observe her in a different context. When he arrived at the address, Samantha was waiting outside, carrying a large, colorful bag. She smiled when she saw Rick and got into the car. "Hey, Rick, what a coincidence running into you again," she said. "Looks like I'm starting to depend on you, huh?" Michael smiled back, noticing the light tone in her voice. "I'm happy to help." "Where are we headed today?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "I'm going to the orphanage, where I do volunteer work. I had some things to bring today, and I thought it would be easier with a driver." "I hope you don't mind," she explained. Michael replied that it was no problem at all, and soon they were on their way. The journey was smooth, and Samantha spoke animatedly about how eager she was to see the children. Michael asked a few questions here and there, trying to pick up any clues about her intentions, but all he got were sincere answers and genuine enthusiasm for the work she did. "They're amazing, you know. They have so much energy and hope despite everything they've been through. I try to bring a little joy to them, but honestly, I'm the one who always comes away happier," she said, her eyes shining in a way that was hard to ignore. Upon arriving at the orphanage, Michael parked the car and watched as Samantha exited, carrying the colorful bag. He thought about waiting outside, but curiosity got the better of him. He approached the entrance, trying not to look suspicious, and saw Samantha being welcomed by a swarm of hugs from little children running toward her. He observed her for the next hour, hidden from afar, as she distributed toys, books, and sweets she had brought. But it wasn't just the gifts that made the children smile. It was how Samantha interacted with them. She laughed, played, and knelt to speak with each child, looking them in the eyes as if they were the only important people in the world. It was a kind of generosity and empathy that Michael hadn't seen in a long time. Later, when Samantha returned to the car, she looked exhausted, but satisfied. "Sorry for the delay, Rick. I guess I ended up spending more time than I planned," she said sheepishly. Michael shrugged and smiled. "No problem at all. It's always good to see someone doing good," he replied. The ride back was marked by a comfortable silence, but Michael was full of thoughts. The woman he was trying to judge seemed to be a true enigma, a living contradiction to what he expected to find. Back at the pickup point, Samantha got out of the car and turned to thank him. "Oh, thank you for today, Rick. I know it seems like a small thing, but it really made a difference for me to be able to go there and back without worrying about transport," she said with sincerity that Michael had almost forgotten existed in the business world. "I hope I can count on you for future rides." As he watched her walk away, Michael felt caught in a dilemma. It was hard for him to admit, but each new interaction with Samantha seemed to dissolve a little more of his distrust. Still, he couldn't help but wonder, what if all of this was a grand act? What if she knew exactly how to behave to deceive both him and Jason? After all, people were very good at playing the game of appearances, and Michael couldn't afford to let his guard down just yet. In the following days, he deliberately accepted more rides near the places Samantha frequented, hoping to cross paths with her again. And, of course, it didn't take long for him to succeed. On a rainy Thursday morning, a new opportunity arose. Samantha had requested a driver to take her to a work meeting in a distant neighborhood, and Michael promptly accepted the request. When he arrived at the location, he saw Samantha standing under an awning, trying to shield herself from the rain while talking on the phone. She got into the car quickly, still a little wet, and apologized for her rush. "Today is a madness, and this rain doesn't help," she said, laughing at the situation. Michael smiled and commented on how unpredictable the weather had been lately. But something in the way Samantha dealt with that situation caught his attention. Even with the rush and stress of the meeting ahead, she still found time to be polite and pleasant. During the ride, Samantha began to talk a bit about her job as a designer at a startup. She explained that she loved what she did, even though the environment was competitive and sometimes exhausting. "I never wanted to depend on anyone," she said, looking out the window as raindrops slid down the glass. "My mom always taught me that if you want something, you need to fight for it with your own hands. That's why I love what I do, because it's mine." Michael couldn't help but feel a certain respect for those words. He knew how hard it was to build something on your own, and hearing that from Samantha touched him in a way he hadn't expected. But still, he continued to wonder if all of it was true. Was it possible that Samantha had another side she hadn't shown yet? When the ride ended, Samantha quickly said her goodbyes, wishing Michael a good day. He watched her exit the car and disappear into the office building. For the first time, Michael felt divided. It was as if two voices were inside him, one insisting that he was right to remain suspicious, and the other beginning to think that perhaps he was looking for something that didn't exist. But he still wasn't ready to surrender to that last voice. Michael knew he needed to see his plan through to the end. He needed concrete proof, something that could convince not only himself, but also Jason, should Samantha be hiding something after all. And for that, he would need to be even more astute and find a way to put her to the test. The days that followed were a mix of anxiety and curiosity for Michael. He continued to work as Rick, accepting various rides to maintain the facade, but his main focus was to find a way to test Samantha once and for all. He needed to see how she would react in a pressure situation where she would have something to gain or lose. It was then that a perfect opportunity presented itself. One afternoon, while driving through the city, Michael received a phone call from Jason. His son was a bit flustered and mentioned that Samantha had offered to pick up a birthday gift for a co-worker from a store on the other side of town. She was super busy, but thought it would be nice to do this, Jason explained, a bit impressed. I suggested she call a driver to make things easier. Michael immediately knew this was his chance. He accepted the ride and drove to pick up Samantha. When she got into the car, she was carrying a small, well-wrapped box. Hi, Rick. I'm so glad you accepted the ride. This gift is for a co-worker's birthday, and I wanted to make sure he got something special, she said, carefully placing the box on the seat next to her. Michael decided to test her reaction with a slightly different approach this time. He began asking questions about the gift and then casually remarked on how rare it was to see someone putting so much effort into others, especially in a work environment. Most people just do the bare minimum, you know, but you seem different, he said, trying to fish for any information about her motivations. Samantha chuckled lightly. I think small kindnesses can make a big difference. My mum always said that when you do something from the heart, it comes back to you in some way, and I like to believe that, she replied with a smile. Michael felt her words were sincere, but he still wanted to dig deeper. He needed a more challenging situation, something that would really test her character. During the drive, as Michael navigated the busy streets, he thought of a strategy. He stopped at a traffic light, looked back, and with a slightly hesitant tone, said, You know, Ms. Samantha, I've never been one to ask favors from my passengers, but I'm in a tough spot. My car is having a mechanical issue that needs fixing, and I don't have enough money for the repair. I don't know what to do. It was a risky bluff, but Michael wanted to see how she would react to an unexpected situation. He knew it could come off as a suspicious request, something any cautious person would see as a potential scam. If Samantha reacted poorly, it could indicate that she was inherently suspicious or had a side she hadn't revealed yet. But what he really wanted to know was, would she help someone in need, even if she had nothing to gain from it? Samantha was silent for a few seconds, clearly processing what she had just heard. Michael watched her through the rearview mirror, trying to decipher her expression. Finally, she responded, That's terrible, Rick. I'm so sorry you're going through that. What exactly is wrong with the car? Michael quickly fabricated a story about a problem with the engine, mentioning that he would need at least $1,000 for the repair. He saw Samantha frown in thought before answering, I don't usually carry a lot of cash, but I can help in some way. Maybe I can advance some money, and if you need more, I can look into loan options that might help you. That caught Michael by surprise. He had expected a polite refusal or at most a symbolic offer, but Samantha seemed genuinely willing to help, even without knowing him well. Still, he needed to test a bit more. I truly appreciate it, Ms. Samantha. I really didn't expect anyone to care about this, he said, trying to maintain a humble tone. But I feel bad accepting your help. I don't want to cause you any trouble. It's no trouble at all, Samantha insisted. I know how tough things can get, and sometimes we all need a helping hand. If we don't help each other, what are we doing after all? She took out her wallet and pulled out some bills, handing them to Michael. Here, I hope this helps a little. If you need more, we can figure out what to do later. Michael accepted the money, still processing what had just happened. This wasn't what he had expected, and he felt a wave of confusion. His experience told him that no one was that generous without a hidden motive, but here was Samantha showing an empathy that felt genuine. He knew that if it had been someone else in her position, the response could have been very different. When they arrived at the destination, Samantha got out of the car and took the gift she had bought. Before leaving, she turned to Michael and said, "I know it's hard to ask for help, Rick, but I hope everything gets resolved. You seem like a good person, and I believe good things happen to good people." She smiled in a way that seemed to brighten the grey, rainy day. As Michael drove home, with the bills still in the console, he felt confused. Part of him wanted to believe that Samantha was exactly who she appeared to be, a kind and compassionate person who genuinely cared about others. But another part, the part that had been betrayed in the past and had grown skeptical, still couldn't fully let his guard down. He knew he couldn't base his final assessment on just that moment, but something inside him had changed. Perhaps he was beginning to realize that, no matter how many reasons he had to be suspicious, he couldn't let that distrust govern his life completely. Perhaps, as difficult as it was to admit, Samantha was teaching him something he had forgotten. That there was still goodness in the world, and that not everyone was only interested in what they could gain. But Michael still wasn't ready to give up the plan. He needed one more proof, something conclusive. And for that, he would have to orchestrate one last situation that could reveal Samantha's true intentions once and for all. Michael spent the weekend reflecting on his recent interactions with Samantha. It was clear to him that there was something genuinely good about her, but he still refused to let his guard down completely. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Perhaps it was fear of being wrong and ending up putting Jason in a dangerous situation. For Michael, one wrong decision could be costly, and he wasn't willing to take that risk. He decided that he needed one final proof, a test that would be impossible to fake. If Samantha was who he suspected, she would show her true colors when confronted with a situation where she had something to gain or lose. Michael knew that for this, he would have to be creative. It was then that he devised a more daring and risky plan. On Monday morning, he prepared for another day as Rick, the rideshare driver. But this time, before he started accepting rides, he stopped by a garage he knew and spoke with one of the mechanics. "I need a favor," he told the man. "I want you to pretend my car broke down for good, something that seems like a big and expensive problem." The mechanic, who already knew Michael from previous occasions, agreed without asking questions. For all intents and purposes, Rick's car was now out of commission. Michael then patiently waited for a new ride request from Samantha. He knew she usually scheduled her rides in advance, and it wasn't long before the request came through. She needed a driver to take her to an appointment in a neighboring city. Michael accepted immediately, and when the scheduled time approached, he called Samantha. "Ms. Samantha, this is Rick. I have some bad news. My car has completely broken down, and the mechanic said the repair is going to be expensive. I think I'm going to need to cancel today's ride. Unfortunately," he said, trying to sound frustrated. "Oh, no! What terrible news!" Samantha replied, genuinely concerned. "What happened? Is there anything I can do to help?" "I really don't know, Ms. Samantha," Michael said, sighing. "The repair is going to cost more than I have at the moment, and I'm a bit lost. I'm even thinking about selling the car, but then I'd be left without a means of support." Samantha fell silent for a few seconds, as if she were considering what to say. Michael waited, trying to catch any hesitation or discomfort in her voice. Finally, she spoke. "Look, Rick, I can't imagine how hard this must be for you. If you want, I can advance payment for a few rides to help with the repair. I know it won't cover everything, but it might be a start." Michael smiled internally, but knew it still wasn't enough. "I truly appreciate it, Ms. Samantha, but I don't want to put you in a difficult position. Maybe I just need to find another way to make money. Selling the car might be my only option." That's when Samantha did something Michael didn't expect. She suggested finding a mechanic she knew, someone who might be able to fix the car for a more reasonable price. My uncle works in mechanics, and I can ask him to take a look at your car. Maybe he can solve it for a fair price. And then you don't have to sell your means of support, she said. Michael was taken aback. He had prepared for all possible responses, but not for this one. Samantha was going above and beyond what any ordinary person would do for a rideshare driver they had known for just a few weeks. It was evident that she wasn't trying to get rid of the problem. On the contrary, she was willing to get more involved to help. But still, it wasn't enough for Michael. He needed a situation that would truly test her nature, something that would reveal who Samantha really was. It was then that a riskier idea sprang to his mind. He would decide to reveal himself as Michael, the businessman, but in a way that still preserved the identity of Rick. He wanted to see how she would react to discovering that, unknowingly, she had been interacting with Jason's father all along. Michael returned home and planned his next move. The next morning, he contacted Samantha again and explained that he had managed to borrow a car from a friend to carry on with the ride. When he arrived to pick her up, he greeted her as usual, but this time, instead of going directly to the destination, he made a detour and parked at a quiet cafe. Samantha, intrigued, asked, "Is everything okay? Rick, why are we stopping here?" "I wanted to talk to you before we head to your appointment," he said, turning to her. Samantha looked confused but nodded, waiting for him to continue. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Actually, I'm not who you think I am. I'm not just a rideshare driver. I'm Michael Carter." There was absolute silence as Samantha processed the information. Her eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment she seemed unsure how to react. "Wait, you're Jason's dad?" she asked, a mix of shock and disbelief in her voice. Michael nodded. "Yes, and I have a confession to make. I disguised myself as a driver to observe you, to try to understand who you really are. I wanted to make sure you were with my son for the right reasons, and not just for the money or what he represents." Samantha was completely paralyzed. Michael could see the surprise and confusion in her eyes, and he braced himself for any kind of reaction. Anger, resentment, perhaps even hurt. But what followed was something he could not predict. Samantha began to laugh, a sincere and light laugh that cut through the tension in the air. "I can't believe you did that. This is so unexpected." Michael was taken aback. "You're not angry. I basically tested you without your knowledge. I invaded your personal life." Samantha shook her head, still smiling, but her eyes showed a certain understanding. "I understand why you did this, Michael. And to be honest, I'm relieved that you cared enough to do this. It shows that you care about Jason, and I respect that. I just hope that now that you know me a little better, you realize I'm not with him for money or anything other than who he is." Michael was speechless for a few seconds. He was prepared for any scenario, but not to find a woman who could react with such balance and grace to such a shocking revelation. It was as if, in that moment, something inside him had been disarmed. He realized that his suspicions, fears, and barriers had in fact been his own traps. Samantha looked at him, now more serious. "I just wanted a chance to show that I really care about him and the people he loves. If that meant going through a test that I didn't even know I was taking, so be it. But I hope this is over now, because honestly, I don't know if I could handle being tested again." Michael took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "Yes, Samantha, it's over, and I think you passed with flying colors." The conversation at the cafe was a turning point for Michael. As he drove Samantha to her appointment, he couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened up to that point. He felt a mix of relief and embarrassment, and above all, a growing admiration for Samantha. She had handled the revelation in a much more mature and graceful way than he could have imagined. Instead of exploding with anger or resentment, she simply accepted and understood his motives, something Michael hadn't expected. When they arrived at the destination, Samantha said goodbye to Michael with a warm smile, making it clear that despite what had happened, she held no grudges. "I hope the next time we meet, it will be a bit more normal," she joked before exiting the car. Michael watched as she disappeared into the building, and for the first time, he felt that he had done something right by choosing to disguise himself. He hadn't just tested Samantha, he had come to know her in a way that he might never have been able to if he had approached her as the powerful businessman Michael Carter, and that made him realize that, despite all the control he had always tried to maintain, there was still so much to learn about trusting people. In the days that followed, Michael prepared to tell Jason the whole truth. He knew he needed to be honest about his motives and accept whatever reaction his son had, whether it be indignation or understanding. Michael had never felt so scared about a confrontation as he did about the one that was coming, but he knew it was necessary. To resolve the situation, he would have to be completely transparent with his son, something that wasn't easy for a man used to hiding his fears and insecurities behind a firm, impenetrable demeanor. On the night before the meeting with Jason, Michael called his son and asked to meet at their favorite restaurant. Jason, who had no idea what was happening behind the scenes, readily agreed. That evening, Michael arrived early and chose a more secluded table where they could have a serious conversation without interruptions. He sat, waiting, and felt his heart racing faster than usual. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, as if he were about to negotiate the biggest deal of his life. When Jason arrived, Michael greeted him with a tense smile and offered him a seat. "Dad, what's going on? You look nervous," Jason commented, a curious look on his face. Michael took a deep breath and began to explain. "Jason, I need to be honest with you about something I did that involved Samantha," he said, avoiding his son's gaze for a moment. "I disguised myself as a rideshare driver to get to know her and try to understand better who she is. I wanted to make sure she was with you for the right reasons." Jason's face went still for a few seconds, and Michael could see the surprise and the beginning of indignation growing in his son's eyes. "You did what? Dad, how could you do that? Why didn't you just talk to me or her directly?" Jason's voice rose, and some people at nearby tables turned to look in their direction. Michael raised his hand, asking for calm. "I know, Jason. I know it seems crazy and an invasion of privacy, but I did it because I was worried and because I wanted to protect you. I know it may seem irrational, but after everything that's happened in my life, I've become a person who needs to see to believe. And I know this has made me overly suspicious, especially when it comes to you." Jason shook his head, clearly frustrated. "This is too much, Dad. I thought you trusted me and my judgment, and now I find out that instead of talking like an adult, you decided to play spy." Michael could feel the hurt in his son's voice, and it struck him in a way he hadn't expected. "I made a mistake, son, and maybe I shouldn't have done it. But now that I have, I need you to know something. Samantha is exactly who she says she is. I tested her, observed her, and in the end, I learned more than I expected. She is honest, generous, and most importantly, she is with you because she likes who you are, not what you have." Michael watched as Jason's expression softened slightly, even though anger still lingered. Jason took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "And she knows you did this?" he asked suddenly, as if fearing the answer. Michael nodded slowly. "Yes, I told her yesterday, and she accepted it. She understood my motives, even though she didn't approve of them." The silence that followed was long and tense. Jason seemed to be struggling with what he had just heard, trying to decide how to feel. "I don't even know what to say, Dad," he finally murmured. "This is so surreal. I don't know if I should be angry with you or grateful for your concern." Michael smiled faintly, a tired smile filled with remorse. "I understand, son. And you have every right to feel however you want. I just want you to know that I did this because I love you and wanted to protect you. But maybe I've learned an important lesson in the process. Not everything can be controlled. And sometimes we need to trust people more than we would like." Jason remained silent for a few more seconds, then looked up at his father. "Do you think you can learn to trust more, Dad? Because if so, I want you to try. And honestly, I don't want you doing this again with anyone I love." "I promise, Jason," Michael replied, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "I'll try. I really will." The conversation shifted tone after that. Jason still seemed a bit shaken, but Michael could see that he was trying to accept the apology. They talked about lighter things for a while, and by the end of dinner, Michael felt relieved to have finally been honest with his son. It was hard to admit his mistakes, but perhaps that was the way to start rebuilding the trust he knew he had shaken. That same night, Jason called Samantha. He didn't mention the conversation directly, but he asked how her last ride with Rick had gone. Samantha laughed on the other end of the line and said, "Oh, you won't believe the story I have to tell you, but I think we should talk about it in person. It'll be better." Jason agreed, and as he hung up the phone, he felt a wave of gratitude for having someone like Samantha in his life. Even though his father had done something unthinkable, he knew Samantha would understand, because that was her nature. Someone who looked beyond the surface and tried to find the best in people. The next day, Jason met Samantha for coffee in a cozy and discreet spot. He was anxious to know how she had reacted to Michael's revelation and at the same time worried that all of this might have shaken their relationship. As soon as she arrived, he greeted her with a tight hug and a quick kiss, trying to sense any tension that might be there, but to his relief, she seemed calm, with the same warm smile as always. "I don't even know where to start," Jason said as soon as they sat down. "My dad told me everything. I had no idea what he was doing." Samantha raised her hand to stop him, shaking her head gently. "Jason, it's okay. I was surprised when he revealed himself, of course. But to be honest, I kind of understood where he was coming from. What he did wasn't right, but he just wanted to protect you, and I can respect that, even if I don't agree." Jason sat in silence, admiring the calm with which she was handling all of this. "You're amazing, you know. I think I'd be beside myself if someone did that to me." Samantha let out a soft laugh. "Maybe I was a bit shocked at the moment, but I put myself in his shoes. I imagined that if I were in his position, with all the history he has and the concerns he carries, I might have thought of something similar, even if it was a crazy plan. And I think in the end, all of this brought us closer together." "You're not angry?" Jason asked, still trying to grasp her perspective. "He basically invaded our lives." Samantha smiled softly. "I'm not saying I'm completely okay with it, but I'm choosing not to hold on to anger. He came to me, told the truth, and apologized. To me, that means a lot. Plus, if there's one thing my mum taught me, it's that life is too short to waste time holding grudges. I prefer to focus on what really matters, and that's you, Jason." Her words brought an unexpected warmth to Jason's chest. He took Samantha's hand and squeezed it gently. "I really don't know what I did to deserve someone like you. I love you, you know." Samantha smiled back and replied playfully, "Of course you do. You're charming, smart, and, let's face it, I like your awkwardness," she said, winking. The lightness of the conversation helped dissipate any lingering shadows from the incident. As they talked about other things, Jason realized he didn't want to leave his father out of this reconciliation. He suggested that the three of them meet for dinner. "I think it's important for you and my dad to have a real conversation now that he knows who you are. How about we all have dinner together, just the three of us? Maybe it'll be a way to start fresh," he proposed, hoping Samantha would agree. "I'd love that," she responded without hesitation. "And I think he would too. Who knows, maybe we can all come out of this situation with something positive." The dinner was set for the end of that week, and as the day approached, Michael found himself nervous once again, but in a different way this time. He had agreed to Jason's proposal, but he knew he would be facing Samantha on a new level. This time, not as Rick, the driver, but as Michael Carter, the father of the man she loved and someone who was trying to repair his mistakes. On the night of the dinner, Michael dressed carefully, choosing a shirt that Jason always said made him look less intimidating. He arrived at the restaurant early, and he, while waiting, fidgeted with the menu several times without really reading what was written. The anxiety was there, but he knew he had to face it. Jason and Samantha arrived together, and as soon as they walked in, Michael stood up to greet them. Samantha approached first and, to his surprise, opened her arms and gave him a warm hug. "I'm glad we can have this dinner," she said softly, trying to calm him. "I hope we can move forward." The gesture caught Michael off guard, and he felt a lump in his throat as he attempted to respond. "I'm glad too, and thank you," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Thank you for giving me this chance." They sat down, and dinner began in a light, relaxed manner, with Jason guiding the conversation towards safe topics, like work updates and funny stories from the past. Michael felt relieved for a while, but he knew there was a moment that needed to arrive. He needed to talk directly to Samantha without beating around the bush and settle things once and for all. When the main course was served, Michael put his napkin aside, took a deep breath and started, "Samantha, I need to say that I really admire how you handled everything. I know what I did was an invasion, and you had every right to be upset, but you chose to react in a way I never expected, and for that, I want to apologize again from the bottom of my heart." Samantha looked at him for a moment, as if measuring every word he spoke. Then she smiled, a smile full of understanding. "Michael, you've apologized, and I accepted that. For me, that's enough. But if I may say, I think this whole experience has shown that even as an experienced businessman who's used to controlling everything around him, there are things we can't predict or manipulate, and that's okay. It's part of being human." Michael nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He knew she was right. "Oh, you're right," he said, with an honesty that felt new to him. "And I think you've taught me something important, something I lost along the way. Not everyone has ulterior motives, and there are good people out there. You are one of them. So, thank you." The conversation continued with a lighter tone, and slowly, the tense and uncertain atmosphere transformed into something friendlier and even warm. They laughed together, shared stories, and for the first time, Michael saw Samantha as more than just a potential threat to his son's future. He saw her as a strong woman who had her own principles and was willing to fight for what she believed in, and that, to him, was worthy of respect. When dinner came to an end, Jason suggested a toast. He raised his glass and said, "To us, for making it through all of this and coming out better on the other side. And especially to you, Samantha, for teaching us to be a little more human." They toasted, and Michael found himself smiling in a way he hadn't smiled in a long time. This was not just the end of distrust. It was the beginning of a new phase for him, for Jason, and perhaps for everyone around that table. For the first time in a long while, he felt he didn't need to control everything. Sometimes, all that was necessary was to trust and let life happen. The dinner was a success. Michael, Jason, and Samantha left the restaurant feeling light, as if a weight had been lifted from each of their shoulders. As they walked toward the parking lot, Michael looked at his son and his girlfriend, feeling an overwhelming wave of gratitude. For so long, he had lived surrounded by suspicion, always expecting the worst from people. But there he was, receiving a lesson in trust and empathy from a young woman who, by all rational calculations, should have been just another opportunist. But Samantha was different, and he finally saw that. The walk to the cars was filled with laughter and light jokes, and when they said their goodbyes, Michael made sure to hug Samantha one more time. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was making things difficult," he said, a somewhat awkward smile on his face. Samantha smiled back. "You're Jason's dad, Michael. That means you're important to me too. I hope we can leave the past behind and move forward." Michael nodded. "I hope so too, Samantha, and I truly admire who you are. Jason is a lucky man." After the dinner, Michael returned home and reflected on everything that had transpired over the past months. The nights he spent driving as Rick, the conversations he had with Samantha, the lessons he learned without even realizing it. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to relax and think that maybe he didn't need to control everything to protect what was important to him. Perhaps trusting the right people was the true secret. In the following days, Michael felt different. It was as if he had rediscovered a part of himself that had been forgotten amidst years of business, distrust, and strategies. He decided he wanted to share this new perspective with Jason, not only to reaffirm how much he trusted him, but also to show that he was willing to change. Michael invited his son for lunch over the weekend, and they met at one of the family hotel's restaurants, a place they used to go to when Jason was younger. As soon as they sat down, Jason noticed that there was something different about his father. There was a tranquility, a lightness in the way he moved and spoke. "Son, I wanted to talk about something important," Michael began, fiddling with his napkin. "I know that throughout my life, I've always been a bit controlling, perhaps too controlling, and I think that has affected how I approached you and others." Jason leaned forward, listening intently. "Dad, I get it. You've always done what you thought was best for me, and I respect that. But what are you trying to say?" "I'm trying to say that I'm learning to let go of control," Michael replied, smiling. "It's not easy, and I'm still going to make mistakes, but I'm willing to trust more. And I think the experience with Samantha taught me a lot about that. You chose an incredible woman to be by your side, and I realize that if I keep trying to predict every step, I'll end up losing the chance to see what's truly beautiful in people." Jason remained silent for a moment, processing his father's words. It was rare to see Michael open up like this, and he knew how much it must have cost him. "Dad, hearing you say that means a lot to me. I've always wanted you to trust my decisions, and knowing you're willing to try is a big step." Michael smiled, feeling a silent pride. "I trust you, Jason, and I want you to know that I'll be here to support you, no matter what path you choose. And that includes Samantha. I want both of you to know that you have my full support from now on." After lunch, Jason called Samantha and told her about the conversation he had with his father. "And I think he's finally starting to relax," he said, laughing. "And you know what's even funnier? I think you had a lot to do with it." "I did?" Samantha asked, surprised. "What did I do?" "You showed him that the world isn't as full of ulterior motives as he thought, and more importantly, you showed him that not all good people need to be tested to prove who they are," Jason replied, affection in his voice. "And for that, I'm eternally grateful." The months that followed were marked by a subtle but significant change in the dynamic between Michael, Jason, and Samantha. Michael began to participate more in his son's life, but not in the controlling way he had before. He showed up at events Jason and Samantha organized, took a genuine interest in her work as a designer, and even suggested ways to help promote the social initiatives she supported. Not because he wanted to prove anything, but because he wanted to be part of this new phase of life that his son was building. One day, Jason and Samantha organized a charity event at one of Michael's hotels to raise funds for the organization she collaborated with. Michael volunteered to help with the logistics, and on the day of the event, he was there, working behind the scenes and making sure everything went perfectly. As he watched Samantha interacting with the guests, explaining the project and showing the positive impact the donations would have, Michael felt emotional. He finally saw what Jason saw in her, and it was more than just beauty or charm. It was passion, integrity, and a genuine willingness to do good. At the end of the event, Jason took the stage to deliver a thank you speech. "Tonight is special for all of us," he said, holding the microphone. "Because it's not just about raising funds, but about connecting people who want to do good. And I want to thank two people especially, my dad, Michael, who has been a rock and an example of perseverance for me, and my girlfriend, Samantha, who showed me that the world can be a better place when we allow ourselves to believe in people." The applause filled the hall, and Michael stood up to applaud along with the others. When Samantha and Jason came down from the stage, he hugged them, emotional. "You both did an incredible job," he said, tears in his eyes, "and I'm proud to say I'm part of this." That night, as the event lights dimmed and guests departed, Michael walked to the exit alongside Jason and Samantha. "Thank you for letting me be a part of this," he said. "And thank you for teaching me something I had forgotten." Jason and Samantha smiled at him, and Jason said, "I think, in the end, everyone learned something here, Dad. And that's what matters most." Michael felt a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that in his quest to protect his son, he had shielded himself from something more important, the chance to live fully and trust again. And there, surrounded by Jason and Samantha, he knew he was ready to change. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more emotional accounts, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support us through the thanks button. Until next time.